I have tried to tailor this a little bit to a younger audience, and I'm also delighted that I am talking to a younger audience, because the whole issue of governance in your businesses is something you need to get your heads around when you're young. Because the habits that you put in place now that are stepping stones to that are the habits that will drive your effectiveness as a governor of a much bigger business when you get older. So it's a really important place, and I really relish this opportunity. I mean, farming's really easy. It has to be. I mean, if I look at Harvard University have done a lot of research about the success of businesses. So one of the things that one group of businesses they've looked at are people with a technical knowledge working for someone else who then decide to go into business for themselves. Okay? Electricians, plumbers. I don't say that's you guys, it's all farmers. You learn technical skills of cows and grass, and at some point you say, right, I'm not going to be working for mum and dad anymore, I'm not going to be working, for Mike Murphy or someone else, I'm going to do this myself, go into business myself. Okay, so we're actually farming is in the same place. The interesting thing that Harvard found was that 90% of those businesses failed within 2 years. 90% of businesses who went from a technical background to going and owning their own business actually failed within 2 years. Okay? And half of the rest were gone 5 years out. Now, my contention is that we're much more successful than that in farming. Would you agree?
Yep.
Okay. Now, some of it is because we don't have to do the marketing side of farming. We don't have to go and find our customers, do we? We just have to do the technical bit right and learn a few governance skills, which is standing back from the business and figuring out where we want to get to. And I think that is a big part of why we have that message. But, to me, apart from getting up in the morning, there are some really simple principles behind a successful farming business, and at Positive Farmers Conference and others, you'll have seen those. And in New Zealand, some of our farmers are deviating from those. For example, and so for me, farming is successful if you are investing in appreciating assets. Land, cows that breed other cows. Okay? Not depreciating assets like concrete and tractors and robots and things like that, which are depreciated off and useless within 5 years. Minimising your fixed production costs, taking advantage of technologies to improve land, having good skills, using debt and somebody else's money wisely, some risk taking, and then being absolutely motivated to make it work. This young man is figuring out what it's like to be motivated to make it work right now, because he's a lower order sharemilker, and he's gone from a very high payout to a very low payout, and while last year he thought he was bleeding out of every orifice about how he was going to do it, he now tells me this is now much easier even though the payout's no better. Okay? I don't know if he's making much money yet, it won't be, but being driven as a person to make it work is a key thing. And if you have the advantage of having a partner by your side who is equally driven as you, you are well advantaged in farming. So, okay, that's how we do successful farming. I haven't mentioned governance in there. So, is it really important? So, what do we think? One of the confusing things about governance, it is a buzzword. It's actually not been in the literature. It hardly was in the literature at all, the financial literature, before 1990. Okay. But now it's kind of being bandied around by everybody. And one of the reasons that I think it is confusing is because we have so many different contexts in which we use the word governance. So, for example, we have our government. All right? and we elect people to that government. And presumably they do the governance of the country. Okay? But those people we elect are our representatives. And in a business sense, governance is definitely not about representation. Okay, so we have in our biggest institution in the world that we live in, we have a model of governance that's not related to how the governance of our farming businesses, per se. Because being a governor or a director of a business is not a representative function. All right? We then have who's on school boards, or school committees, and sports clubs committees. They're also a governance role. Does anybody think they're in a governance role right now? Okay. 1 or 2. All right. One of the key, I want to broaden your idea on this. One of the key aspects of governance is having clarity of purpose for your business. All right. When my wife and I got married, we had a conversation about, well, what's the purpose of us getting married? Okay. We're Catholic, so there was that aspect of it. And she's Irish and I'm Dutch, so there were always going to be 10 children, but but what's the purpose of getting married together? What do we want to achieve by being married together? And it was a conversation that went around with us for probably the best part of the year, and then we settled on a very simple statement, a real clear purpose that has driven our lives now 35 years since we've been married. And that purpose was to create an environment where everybody in our family would flourish. Where I as the husband would flourish, where she as the wife would flourish, if we were blessed with children, they would flourish. Alright? Doesn't sound like a governance thing. But it's been very interesting because along life's journey you get faced with decisions you have to make. And every decision we had to make, we always stepped back and said, does that meet with that purpose? Right? Does that decision enhance that fundamental purpose while we're here? Actually, that action is a governance type action. It's being accountable to something agreed by the significant stakeholders, in this case my wife and I. We agreed to a common purpose and we held ourselves accountable in our decision making to achieving that purpose. Okay? So if I had started going to the races and betting £100 or $100 a day, going to the TAB at the races, would that behaviour be in line with that kind of purpose? Would having a mistress on the side be aligned with that purpose? Okay? You can think of a whole lot of decisions that were there. Early on in my career I was asked to be a politician for one of our major parties, and I looked at it and said, well, what would the job mean? Well, it's going to be a lot of time away from home and we had 3 little children. That's nice for me. Is that going to be creating a place for my family to flourish? Okay, it made a really easy decision for me. So governance is something that actually subtly happens in your lives. Those of you who are successful in life subconsciously are governing your behaviour and making a sort of stepping out of yourselves to determine that what I'm going to do is going to always get me to go to this place. Alright? And you're not going to be like the person who says, I want to own a farm, I'm working on a farm, I want to own a farm, but on the way I'm going to go to the pub every night, I'm going to go to a restaurant every night, I'm going to have the flashiest car and I'm going to hot it up so it's the things. And I'm never going to save a bean and wonder why I'm never going to get to my farm. So governance is there. When I came back to New Zealand, I decided to go and ask farmers what they thought governance was about, and you've got a copy of this in case you can't read that. And what I did was I asked bankers, insurance agents, stock agents, farm advisors, and I said, give me the name of the business that you think is the best governed business amongst the farmers that you work with. And those are the ones we went and interviewed. 40 of them. Lanier Ryan was part of that, so was Paul Bird. We went in, and so you can imagine that took some time and there was a lot of notes. When we distilled it all down, we came to this map, if you like, of governance. Okay? So what we found was there is no one right model of governance. But there are very clear trends in what we saw. So, and it's most strongly related to this. How many people have a key stake in the business? So, if I'm in the business by myself, it is my sandpit. I am King Kong in the sandpit, and what I say goes. Alright? Then we didn't find much of this stuff at all. And people ran quite large businesses. One gentleman that we found has got 8 farms. You know? He's got no wife, he's got no children. This is his sandpit. And he plays it very well. As people get married, have children, what we find is these transitions happen. So, in terms of governance vehicles, a formal structure around governance. Early on, me and us. Actually no board around them, no advisory board. Leonie and Kieran Guiney were examples of people who had a very informal governance structure, but there was a regime around it. For example, once a month, they had the relief milker was in, the babysitter was in, so they had a day away from the farm where they could just concentrate on the big picture about their business. And on the way, Leonie or Kieran, one of them had to have the finances up to date, the cash book up to date. They had to know their financial position absolutely accurately, and they sat down and they had half a day away from the farm at their favourite cafe, and they just talked about the big picture of their business. All right? They're like the person who says, I'm going to run the next Boston Marathon, and from today I'm going to start training, and it's that person who could do that all by themselves without anybody else needing to motivate them to do that. That's what Leonie and Kieran are like. Completely self-motivated. What we found then, as more and more people got involved, they tended to involve more and more structure in their business. They had shareholder meetings, trustee meetings, some advisory boards, and for a very small number of businesses we actually found that they operated a formal board, and some operated a family council. What was interesting is that only about 1/10 of the businesses where the owners were identified as directors of a company did they actually have board meetings. Okay. So what they were doing was setting up a company because the accountant said you should have a company, it's the right tax structure, it'll allow you to do certain things. They identified themselves as a director but never understood any of their obligations as a director. And so actually never had any board meetings, things like that. We also found, as things got more complicated, people had more and more clarity around some of the documentation, or had more documentation. We also found that over time they got more and more interested in financial into benchmarking. So 90% of people or 99.9% of people monitor their production from day to day, and week to week and month to month against budget. Somewhat less, about 70%, actually monitor their cash flows. Okay? About 20% of our industry actually benchmark their performance against others in the industry on a financial and operational kind of basis. And then we go to, I think, only 2 or 3 businesses in New Zealand, and one of them is, you will meet if you go to Dairy Holdings, who actually have an independent assessment of how they manage their people within their business. The relationship between managers and their staff, the relationship between head office and supervisors and managers. Very few businesses do that. And then we actually came across 2 businesses who had an independent person review the performance of their board every couple of years. Actually, the research shows that no different to most businesses in town. Okay. So we shouldn't beat ourselves up around that. And then, as a consequence of that, and lagging behind, we had reporting. So there was monitoring going, but actually lagging behind was the amount of reporting. So that's sort of a roadmap of things, and one of the exercises that we got, I get farmers to do, and how many of you got pens? Okay. One of the interesting things to do is just go through this and circle in each column, you know, the things that you currently do as part of your governance. Sorry, it's on the back of the second one of the page. Sorry, I should have pointed that out. There is a whole page one, yes. And what you should find in that is that, you know, the circles you'll put in, I guess there'll be some well down the column, and you probably missed a few above it, and there'll be some columns you've gone into much more depth with than other columns. Okay? And that's good, that's normal. That little exercise you can use as a wee pointer to kind of say, okay, well, what's the low-hanging fruit in some other column that I haven't tackled yet, that maybe I should think about doing. Okay. And as I tried to indicate with my story about my wife and I and this whole notion of creating a place for our family to flourish, the most important aspect of all of this is clarity about your purpose. That's the starting point. Are you physically only in Kieran town?
Sunday and Monday.
Sunday, Monday. Yeah. I hope that they show you a graph. I think they'll show you a big sheet of their equity growth over time. And what's really interesting about that, and it's been a feature of all the winners of Shem of the Year and Farm Business of the Year, is they know for that exercise, if they want to win it, they've got to map something out. They've got to say, here's our equity growth, and here's where we're going to go in 5 years. Okay? Now, early on in this project, Lanier and I rang most of the people who had got in the top 3 places in those competitions. And we asked them 2 simple questions. The first question was, when you mapped out that equity growth and projection for the 5 years, did you really believe the projections you were putting out there? Like that you were going to be able to do them? And almost all of them said no. We just thought it looked good, you know. It's what the judges want to see. Okay? The next question was, did you achieve it? And almost every one of them said, we didn't just achieve it, we smashed it out in half the time. All right? That exercise is part of having a purpose, making every decision align with where you want to go. So we learned a few things from this exercise, because while we were looking at businesses that other people thought were well governed, we actually found that there were businesses doing informal governance as well, or better, or more effective for their businesses than many of the businesses who'd gone to a formal board. How did we know that? Very simple. We didn't believe what they said. We asked them for the minutes and the agendas of their board meetings. And what do you think we found when we looked at the agendas and minutes of their board meetings? What do you think they were discussing? Which paddock the cows had gone? Should the electric fence standards be one way or the other? What semen should we use for what cow? They were production committees. They were not boards of governance. So they hadn't been able to step out of much of the role of their business. We found as a result that structure isn't important. Process and culture and discipline is the important part of governance. That people were really confused, even people who were on governance committees in the wider industry really couldn't take that understanding of governance and make it work within their farms. They really didn't understand how to make it work properly. And as I said, most formal governance was poorly understood. So there was a big gap in that. But to me, I think governance is really, really easy. And that's on the other side of that page. I think it's much like a bicycle. I'm just not going to sweat this analogy, but you know, when you're in an operational part of the farm, you know, you are worried about where the fence goes and where the cows go next, and you know, who's going to milk the cows and what's the roster, you know, where am I on the roster, and you know, do I have the skills to carve a difficult cow and all of those things. And that's like the front wheel of the bike. It's essential that you have a robust set of skills in your business. Now, driving that crew is a management team, or somebody driving management, who's looking ahead and making strategic risk assessments, thinking about how to motivate and improve the performance of their staff, what skills do they need, organising contractors, organising health and safety, you know, doing the operational management of the business. All right? This drives it forward. Where governance fits in, that's the script sitting up on here, on the seat. Because a bicycle going round and round in circles isn't going to go anywhere as a business, is it? Somebody has got to be on top and decide where it is you want to go. Not just where it is you want to go, I want to go over there, but am I going to go straight there, or am I going to go this way? If I go straight there, I've got to go through some big hills, I might have to go through some gravel roads. Have I got the right gearing to do that? That's debt. Have I got sturdy enough tyres and capability in my wheels to do that? Okay, if I haven't, I've got to choose a different way to get there. But the governance group are those on the top. A friend of mine, when describing the businesses that there's a couple who came on our governance course, and this is a series of pictures they used to describe the governance of the business that they joined, which was the family business. So he was a futures banker in Auckland, and his wife had come off a sheep farm in Southland. And they decided, because of the call of Dad, who suddenly had a heart attack and was incapable, who then put the emotional pressure on them, his daughter, and him, dutiful husband, to come and take over the farm. All right? Now, even though this guy was incapacitated to a large extent by having a major heart attack. This is the way that that young couple described the governance of the business. This was the ailing old man on a unicycle, out on his own, taking huge risks. Okay? Not involving anybody else in key decisions around the business at all, no matter what the collateral impact was if he fell off that and dropped down the cliff. Right? They thought they should change that and get on board on the governance vehicle. And after a couple of years, they kind of decided that this described their governance model, where there was the wife's dad sitting on one, and this was them sitting on the other. In fact, there was no alignment about where they wanted to go at all. I think some of you who are working in family businesses might feel that at times between generations. So they decided to invest off the home farm. All right? I reckon it was a bit like this. Okay? In other words, governance was so far removed from the action on the ground that they had no idea what was kind of going on. All right? And after about 4 or 5 years in that investment, they decided that it wasn't going anywhere. Okay? And now this is how they describe their governance. So they have 4 children, none of them are farming, and they have progressed and they're all on their board, and they have got over themselves that they are farmers and have realised what they are is a family with a large amount of capital who now have it invested in a passion that mum and dad have, all right? But the asset is the capital, not the farm. The asset is the capital. So when the whole thing was all about this family business to be a governance group on the farm, the children were not interested at all. When they suddenly decided, hey, what's the best use of this capital we've got invested in the farm? We're going to keep the farm because mum and dad really have got to really enjoy farming and they're driving a good profit. So what is the best use of this capital for the family? Is it in more farms? Is it in another business that some of us are really passionate about? How can we grow the pie for everybody? And so in Dairy NZ, we've taken the governance definition. This is the one that is used in Europe, in the OECD. So governance is a process of controlling and directing a business. And we've added one other bit to that, because in farming we are a very small business and it's all about what it delivers for the owners. If I am a shareholder in telecom, do I expect the governors of the business to be interested in what I want as a shareholder when I'm one of about 2 million investors? No. But in our farming businesses, governance has a special place. It's all about delivering to a set of outcomes agreed by the owners. Here's another thing that governance in a farming business is really different. It's because our family and home are all entwined. And that's a bigger issue for you in Europe than it is here, where there's a much stronger emotional attachment to the land that you own as a family. And so the implications of this are much higher. Okay? The other thing we found that's quite different in farming businesses is this. If I'm a governor of a reasonably large business in town, or a business, say, with a similar amount of capital involved, say $10 million worth of capital involved in a business, actually I'll have quite a big admin office who are doing all the record keeping and all the administration. And yet when I look at farmers with a large investment, capital involved, very poor administration structures, not much skill, access to professionals to help them in these kind of things, little opportunity to experience what good governance looks like in another business. Have you accepted on the government's decisions on another farming business? Okay. It's quite a different place. Quite a different place. The other thing that's different here in us is that we very much have one person who's driving the business. Okay. Probably in Ireland, you know, in the demonstration farms that we did, one of the key things was to have somebody who was under 35 for not the Kilkenny farm, but for the other two demonstration farms we had. Because young people are more likely to still be keen to drive something really hard and make it work than somebody who's now 60. And the other thing, of course, is that we've got a lot of people in lots of different roles. And this is the way we usually think about our family farming business. So, you know, we have who does the work, who's the boss, and we think who owns it. And actually, this group in the middle, who actually governs the business, is almost invisible in the context of how we think about our farming businesses. What we really need to think about is almost who's doing the work is irrelevant in terms of governance. Who's acting as the CEO? Who is the one person in terms of operation of the business where the buck stops? That's the CEO. The CEO is responsible to and accountable to this group, the governing group, who may not be the same as the owners. And that's what we usually, when we think of this a bit broad, that's as far as we often get. But what I found is in the businesses, the family businesses that are really, really well governed, they also have this. They're also very aware of who in the family has a close interest. They may not be an owners, but you know, it might be mum and dad's parents who don't have an ownership interest in the business, but actually through their efforts got them into a position to be able to own the farm. As well as children or beneficiaries, there's a trust. And it goes even a bit further sometimes. Well, it should do. That should be recognised. What do I mean by significant others? Who might I be? It's a common phrase in New Zealand. Your significant other. Who's your one? Okay? Your partner. Yeah. Your one. Is it? Have I got that right? Got the context right? Exactly. You know, it amazes me, on our governance course, we've had 5 governance courses. On each one we've had about 12 businesses. And some of the businesses, because of, you know, and matrimonial property law in New Zealand says if you've been in a relationship with a person for more than 3 years, unless there's a, you know, prenuptial agreement, then essentially they own half of everything, right? So we have these businesses turn up where it's only the blokes who turn up. Half the shareholders and half the owners don't even exist in any of the decision making. And we've got other businesses where, you know, where it's the couple is there. And it's kind of like, you see the difference in the conversations between businesses where there's husbands and wives and if the children are involved, their partners are involved, is completely different. So what are the things that these people work on? It's not the governing group, it's the owners who have to define purpose, vision, some key goals, and what values they are going to do in their business, and what their risk appetite is. Okay? So it's like, simplest way is, these things here That's like saying, that's the end point over there. All right? Clarity about business values and risk is like saying, okay, I want you to get there, but you're not allowed to go outside of these boundaries in business behaviour and in the risk you take on. All right? You understand that? One is very prescriptive. It says that's where we agree to go. The other one is telling us where we are not allowed to go. We're not allowed to take on risk beyond this level of debt, or this level of debt servicing, or this kind of behaviour values. So for some people, it might be that, you know, we are never going to let our cows get below condition score. In New Zealand, score 4. So in Ireland, the Irish one. Okay? You're choosing into it. Yeah. So some people would just say, it's completely unacceptable to have any cows go below condition score 4. I mean, math in New Zealand only steps in if they get down to 2.5. That's where they think there's a problem. Okay? So it's quite a big way up. Other businesses don't have that kind of value thing at all, as long as they don't get, say, below 3. There's a whole lot of values things people put in. But this is at the core. The owners in a family business need to define this, and the better they can define this and articulate it, the more they actually empower the governing group, and the easier they can hold the governing group to account. The big thing about governance is holding people, leadership and holding people to account. So the governing group say, right, now we understand where you as owners want us to take the business. We understand the things that you're not allowed to do in terms of core values or risk. So we're now going to demonstrate leadership and strategy and oversight to deliver that. So we're going to make the big decisions that are going to get us towards that place. And we are going to be held accountable for delivering to those. Okay? So if a board starts going and doing things that are not aligned with this, what do you do as an owner? Get rid of them. You absolutely get rid of them. And this is really interesting, because as soon as you understand that, then actually as an owner, you haven't lost control, have you? It's not as though you've lost control. If I have said to a governing group and also to the management team, so the governing group then define through leadership strategy, they map that out, and the CEO then has to make it happen, has to deliver to these, has to operate within the values and the risk appetite of the owners. If that is already all clear, doesn't that make it simple for the CEO? Because they look at a decision and say, right, is this aligned with the values that our owners have? Is this within the risk profile? Am I going to take the business outside of that risk matrix that they're not happy with, or within that? Well, if it is, I go for it. I don't have to go to the board for permission. I just go for it. So businesses that set this up actually empower their management to deliver. What I find is that's a rarity. What I find instead are businesses where the CEO can hardly sneeze without having to go back to the board for permission. And in one business case, one business that has fallen apart, they were milking 1,500 cows up near Kerikeri. The CEO, who happened to be a 35% shareholder, anything that cost more than $10,000, he had to go to the board for permission for. Anything that was over $15,000, the board had to go back to 25 shareholders to get permission. Okay? The business collapsed. Absolutely. So what do these other people in here, what do they add to this? These people you need to involve in this whole thing about the business values. Why? Because they have the same surname as you, and the reputation of the farm influences their brand. If you, as a farming business, treat your staff badly, pollute the environment, have cows dying left, right and centre, and you turn up at the local pub even though you're not on the farm, what's it done to your brand? What's it done to your sense of value? So these people do have an important role to play there, as well as influencing the succession whole discussion. And this gets even further out, family reputation and fairness to people. And where we see these things happening, we're starting to get some really well-governed businesses. So, if I look at this the other way, when we go and research and say, what family businesses are out there that have survived 4 generations of business together as a family, we find these things happening. Okay? We find these things happening without exception. And behind that, and the key reason is, because quite different to a corporate, families in business have a responsibility not to destroy family relationships. And it's the most fundamental difference between a corporate world in business and the family thing in business. Families in business, if you have a son or daughter who has ownership or aspirations to ownership, or a family member, when you piss them off, you destroy not only a business future going forward, you probably don't meet at Christmas anymore, you might see the grandkids, like you destroy a lot. If Telecom do something that pisses me off as a shareholder, like go and invest in a munitions company, well, it's fine. If it pisses me off enough, I can sell my shares. But this is the greatest responsibility that's happening. And the responsibility in this regard that most families do not give proper thought about is that relationship with a significant other of their children. All right? It's almost like, I'm not sure what's gone into people's heads about it, but it's like, from one end, the other blonde from town who's going to rip off half the asset. She's a gold miner and, think about the number of parents who've said to me, that their son or daughter's been married for 5 years, and they say, I don't know if the relationship's permanent. And I kind of say, well, how old were you when you got married? Usually younger than when their children got married. So, a couple of years into it, did you think the relationship was permanent? Yep. Okay, but you're not going to give that kind of, assumption to your children? Like, come on, people. Treat adults like adults. The other thing that's strongly related to this in families is that you get governance when you can create a safe place. Do you think what you might think what I'm getting at here? A safe place.
Very comfortable to speak your mind, speak what's inside you.
Yeah, about the business.
Where you want to.
You have to create a place and time where you agree that we can have robust decisions about what the business needs to resolve and how it goes forward, and we are not going to make it personal. Okay? In other words, I'm not saying this as your son just to piss you off. I'm saying this because I genuinely think this is an option we need to look at for going forward in the business. So the safe place, if a safe place has happened, the discussion is, okay, so what are the pros and cons of this? What are the risks? And evaluate it on an objective thing. And Dad says, we're going to do this. You know, oh God, you don't take any more risks anymore. You're just, you know, not going to have that discussion. No, it's about, okay, let me understand why you think this is the way forward. What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the risks? What are the lost or gained opportunities if we do this? And you know what? If you have this, you also say, how does that fit with this? How does that fit with this? So I'm taking the discussion, the material discussion away from me as a person and evaluating against some key things that we've agreed to somewhere else. And part of that is creating a safe space. And in some families, they actually write down a charter. One of the families on one of our courses, one of the things in the charter was that nobody was to come to a governance meeting under the influence of drugs. Okay? Now what was really interesting was that in the discussion with the parents, because it's the parents who came along to the course, the issue, as they publicly put it, was the fact that their daughter had a drug abuse issue. And they wanted her involved in the discussion in the governance thing. But when she was under drugs, she couldn't have a conversation with her. Right? And so they started they shaped up this charter. And then in a quiet conversation to me later that evening, the wife came up to me and said, I need to change the words around this. I said, why? She said, because my husband comes into the thing drunk at times too. Okay? So the wording got really subtly changed, so nobody will be under the influence of drugs to come to that meeting. In some businesses, they also, on this as well, they have a thing about behaviour. They all agree there will be no swearing. Right? They'll all agree you're not going to cry. Right? Isn't it a powerful tool when the woman starts to cry? It's a tough discussion. All right? It's not a powerful tool? Oh, okay. That's a really powerful. So, okay, if you're going to cry, go and help the emotion. We'll just adjourn the meeting until you're all ready. We'll come back again. There are, I'm raising some things that. Dress code. Some people say, and agree, that what they will do around the safe place is say, well, one of the ways that we can make it safer and to stay in a governance role is actually to dress differently. So some businesses say, we're going to have this meeting around the kitchen table, but nobody's going to be wearing overalls and gumboots and things like that. You're going to put on a business shirt. Some even say you're going to put on a tie. All right? Now you can't see that you're wearing a business shirt and a tie, but you can see everybody else around the tables wearing a business shirt and a tie. And as soon as you have that, somebody starts talking about the cows, you say, that's an overalls discussion. We're talking about the governance of this business. We've got this on the agenda. So, these things are all in here. In our courses, we've done a lot of stuff around how to get these discussions, how to get decisions made. And some businesses feel a need and have benefited greatly by actually sitting down and writing down a few points around this. Again, it's something agreed to out of the heat of the moment, that in the heat of the moment you can go and say, hang on a minute, we're not behaving like we agreed to behave. Very simple things that makes things work. And then the other thing that's coming in, it's really quite big in Europe, it's this idea of a family council. So quite often what happens, you have a family business, and it's the blood relations who are the directors of the business, and then you say, all those significant others, what do you do with them? Okay? Well, you involve them in a family council. And the family council has input into the business values. Are we going to do anything philanthropic? Are we going to do something good for the community as a business? How are we going to lift our brand in the community about our business? How do we want to be seen as a family? Those kind of discussions. And in some cases, the family council also takes on the responsibility of training young people into the skills to step into a governance role within the business. Okay? Can you see how these things can be used as tools? Okay, so nearly finished. So just go on to the corporate, just to clarify the thing about where does corporate governance, style governance fit in this. The academic literature kind of says, there's no need for formal governance if you've got no separation between ownership and control. But I think the discussion and the points I've brought to your attention over the last little while have suggested huge value in still having governance, even though you have no separation between ownership and control. Okay? So let's just see what happens if you start, what are the things that separate ownership and control? One is bringing in more equity, either from inside or outside the family, and I would say that sweat equity, so who understands sweat equity? Okay? Working, especially in families, children working on the promise of something down the line is sweat equity. Okay? Starting to split ownership and control, and so there's an increasing need for formality around the governance of that business. In New Zealand, where we have share milking, and I think in Ireland we're part of the expansion process, the big discussion happening around share farming. I'm not sure what the situation is in the UK around that, but again, this to me is a situation where there is a definite separation between ownership and control, and there should be a governance group around that relationship. And we do that really bad in New Zealand. Really, really bad. At the moment, we tend to treat share milkers as our slaves. And, even worse than staff, I think, at times. Because the law tells us boundaries about our relationship as an employer with staff, but the law has no protection for share milkers. And yet they're our business partner. And yet we don't do the necessary things around those. The next thing is scale and complexity. The number of farms you add, the bigger the farms, the more and more people that get involved, where you, as an owner, are now not directly deciding where the cows are going and everything else like that, not in control directly. You've got other people between you and control. Elements of formal governance are a key part of that. As I said, involvement of family in the business, especially when you're getting into multi-generational kind of businesses. So, what kind of summary around all of that? From what I've seen, and I'm not pretending at all that it's easy, but those families that adopt some form of governance have got a major competitive advantage in the long term. And the younger you start doing these things, the better, because governance is a skill. And it's just like, there are people out there who can win the World Ploughing Championships. All of us can drive a tractor, all of us can put a plough in the ground, but there are only one or two people in every country who are really, really, really skilled at ploughing. Okay? Same thing. Why do we pretend that we can do nothing about governance till we've got a big business, and then suddenly we're going to be good enough at doing it, that business? It's a skilled practice. And it's about those decision-making and accountability. And I want to reiterate the point that governance actually liberates management. Make sure if it's done properly, like I talked about earlier on, a well-governed business leaves management absolute clear direction and clear boundaries about where to go forward and where not to go forward. So I'll leave you with a couple of quotes. Sir Adrian van Bysterveldt, who's heard of him? He's kind of the go-to person in governance in the whole of the OECD. And he made this comment, which I think is right on the mark for everybody. Because, you know, working on this stuff is not easy. Some of the people on our governance courses took them 2 years as a family to get to the point where they were happy with their purpose statement. All right? They started, they thought it was really easy, here's our purpose, and then people said, why? Kids said, why? Mum said, why? Why is that our purpose? Oh, because of this and this and this. Oh, okay, we don't agree with some of that stuff. So let's morph that a bit. Okay, now that's our purpose. Why? Okay? And why, and why, and why. And finally you get down to something core. Really interesting, one of the businesses who worked on this had an Irish ancestry, and part of their core purpose was to be proud of their Irish heritage. Okay? Proud of their Irish heritage. And what they did as a family, even though they were been in New Zealand for nearly 30 years, okay, and the children have been born in New Zealand, that part of their purpose, that's one of the 3 purpose statements that they had, defined certain things about what they did. Can you imagine one of the things that they did as part of that? Huh? Make sure all of the kids and grandkids and things went to Ireland to find out what their heritage was about, and to do the track back of where their ancestors come, and to understand the sacrifices that their ancestors had made for them to get to here. The next thing they did was said, if we're looking for staff on farm, there's a young Irish person over in Ireland who wants the experience of New Zealand farming, find them. So it actually had tangible things about what they did. Colin Nama, who you've met, this was a statement he made. And if you think about the scale of Colin Nama's business and what he's done and how he's done it, I think this really epitomises what governance means to him. It's that ability to step back and find the opportunities and then have the space to actually make it happen. You know? Colin, for example, Colin's farms were at Te Puke, then they were around Rotorua, and the murmurs started going on around the environmental state of Lake Rotorua. Okay? And while all the rest of the dairy farmers around that area are busy farming and milking cows and worrying about staff, Colin's sitting back there thinking, what the hell will this result? What's the future going to be like? So even before anything happened into reality, while prices for those farms were still high, he sold out of all of those farms in the Rotorua catchment. The market price for those has dropped significantly since. Not only that, he said, this is the future, so before I buy another one, I'm going to be talking to the regional councils, and I'm going to find out which regional council I can work with to farm how I want to farm. And that's why he's ended up buying farms where you visited them. Because they were the councils he went to and said, this is how I want to farm. How does that fit with where you think, environmentally sustainable is? And that's why he's there. He wouldn't have got that, made that fundamental shift in his business without that happening. And then the final one is, there are common practices and principles and they apply to both sides. So thank you very much for your attention.